Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the st.rb podcast. Today Kevin Clark is going to be talking to us about REST with Rails.
Cool. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about this new trendy REST thing that you keep hearing about, and if you've been reading the core list or reading various blogs, and how it fits into Rails. So, first of all, what is REST? Well, although I need it, it's none of these things. And I just really liked this picture. But what it is an alternative to SOAP and these other web service protocols that, seem like a good idea when you talk about it and when you think about it, but when you try and use it, it's a huge pain in the ass. So REST is sort of a simplification of this. And it stands for Representational State Transfer. But what it really means is stateful HTTP and resources. And I kind of like to think of resources as objects for the web. You've got a location that represents a set of data, and then you can manipulate it in some way using the HTTP verbs or actions that have been built into the API. And currently, if you look at our URLs and you look at how we're developing, it really feels like functional programming. So this is very much about URIs. So if we look at these URIs, which are kind of typical of a Rails app, you've got our basic create, read, update, delete. They don't really represent objects. You're creating, you're calling the create action in the citizens controller or the show action in the citizens controller and passing in a parameter. But if you look at these as functions, we've kind of got show citizen and then we're passing in one, or update citizen and passing in one, and it doesn't really feel like we're working with items, which is nice a lot of the time. So to our rescue are the HTTP verbs. And I sort of like to think of them as superheroes. We all know about the big two, post and get. And get's sort of our detective. He goes in, he's like Batman, he grabs the information, but he doesn't really blow lots of stuff up. The idea is that he goes in and grabs the information, and that's what you need, but he's not destructive. Now, when you need to create something or delete something on the web currently, well, that's when we pull in the big guns, and we use post. And, post is sort of there for the heavy lifting when you want to manipulate something. But, there's two little guys that people sort of know about, but don't really pay attention to, and that's put and delete. And put is supposed to be used for updating records, while delete's supposed to be for deleting them. And this was all in the initial implementations of HTTP, but the browsers never really caught on to it. So we got stuck using get and post for things they weren't necessarily supposed to be used for. Gets are really supposed to be independent, so a link shouldn't destroy something. Theoretically, you shouldn't be able to have a link to an URL that deletes a record, because get shouldn't harm anything. That's what post and update and delete are for. So, if you look at these four verbs, when they team up, they each take on these cruddy roles. So, post maps onto create, get is like read, put is update, and delete is destroy. So if we apply these to the URIs we looked at earlier, we can get resourceful URLs. So if we post to citizens, it's saying I want to create a new citizen. Whereas if I'm getting citizens with this ID, citizens1 is a specific resource. Citizens1 we can also update or delete. So by using the verbs, we sort of compartmentalize, and this feels a lot more like objects. Citizens is the list of all of the citizens, whereas you can get, put, or delete this specific citizen if you want to later. So how do we stick this into Rails? Well, enter simply RESTful. And you've probably, if you've been watching the Rails blogosphere, you've probably seen this come across. It was a plugin that was written for 1.1, which is broken now, don't try it, that allows you to do all these things. And just like most complex things in Rails, it does it in one line. So map resources citizens immediately gives us all of these mappings to post and get and put and delete that we didn't have before. So when our controller looks like this, we get the mappings that are in purple. So ignore new and edit for one moment, but if you look at index, that's the same as saying get citizens. We want to grab all of the citizens and get that data back. If you look at the create, we map the create action directly to post to citizens, so we're creating a new one. Similarly, update and destroy in our controller map directly to put and delete. Now, the other two don't really fit into the four verbs, new and edit, because they're grabbing information that we're going to use in other places. So Rails' solution to that is to use a semicolon after the resource and then the action name. So in this case, if we're going to edit citizen1, we do citizens1 semicolon edit. Whereas new, because it doesn't act on a specific citizen, we get new immediately after the citizens controller. So that's cool. We get pretty URLs out of it, but really, what's the point? Our URIs are working right now as needed. Well, there's a few reasons why I'm really enjoying writing RESTful Ruby right now. The first is named routes for free. Named routes are really cool, but they're a pain to set up. I mean, in the past, I've really only used it for stuff like the login URL and the logout URL and the home page, because otherwise it takes time to set it up, and I'm not going to set up a named route for each action in my controllers because it takes too much time and I'm lazy. But if you use map resources, you immediately get these. So we get citizen URL, citizens URL, new citizen URL, and edit citizens URL. And using these and the 4 HTTP verbs, we can do any create, read, update, delete action we'd like to. So let me show you a code example real quick, and this will make a little bit more sense. So in the old way, we'd say if we've got an assertions controller, this is from an app I'm working on that I'll show off at some point. We link to our assertions controller with the action destroy, and we want to post to it because get shouldn't be hurting things. So we say post is true. But in the new sense, if you're mapping the resources, then you can say link to the assertions URL, passing in the assertion we're working with, or optionally you can say ID points to 1 or something like that. You can pass in a hash for the arguments in the route, and then we're going to use the delete method on that resource. So that simplifies a lot, but it also gives us these nice clean URLs. So I don't write controller action anymore. I just use these, which are a lot easier on the eyes and Cursor as well. Additionally, this is sort of the 37 signals mantra. Constraints are liberating. So let's think about that classic blog example. You've built up your posts controller. You want to add comments. What do? Do you add an add comment action in your post controller, or do you decide to create a new comments controller with a new action and a create action and deal with it there? So the URIs look like this. Comments new, passing the post ID or the post, and we're going to add a comment. And it's really kind of ugly. So using the RESTful way, we're going to choose option 3 because you can do nested resources if they're associated. So in this case, we're working with post 1 and seeing its comments. So you can do that this way. We say map resources posts, and then the post additionally has resources, and that's comments. So if you're using the name routes below, you can see we want to link to the comment URL that maps to this post and this comment, which is really neat because you don't have to say controller posts action show and then deal with all the other IDs, and it's a pain. This is much simpler. Additionally, you get the accept header for free, and this is really nice when you want to do things in other formats, dump to XML, dump to YAML. In this next example, I'm actually dumping to Ruby. The app I'm working on currently lets you upload assertions and collect them in test helpers, and then actually download modules so you can include them in your tests. So if Tom has a bunch of custom assertions that I like and I want to use in my application, I can just create a bundle of his assertions with my own and download them in Ruby. So here we use respond to with the Ruby format once.rb and then we send our data back. So how do we pass the Ruby as the accept header? Well, you can just do it in the URI. File extensions are back. .rb means that we want to use the Ruby format. And the way this was explained at RubyConf, when the question was asked, aren't we getting away from file extensions? Aren't our routes supposed to be pretty? This isn't about what system we're using. It's not about using PHP or ASP. This is semantic. This is saying, I want user 1, I want helper 2, and I want to get it in Ruby format. So you can similarly do this with XML and Atom and whatever else you'd like. And if you've got your own custom format, like with Ruby in this case, it handles MIME types properly. So if it's in the MIME type library, it already knows about it. If not, you can register your own, in this case, text x Ruby, and pass in the type of format that we're working with. So I can do .rb, and it knows that I'm expecting Ruby back. And that's really useful when you're writing web services. And using Simply RESTful basically gives you web services for free, which is actually what Chris is going to speak on next. So I'm not going to go into that. But really, the reason that I've moved to writing RESTful apps is that it's just cleaner and more expressive. Let's look at how to write a couple forms using these RESTful calls. And actually, I realize that I'm missing an equal sign on this. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm not, because form 4 prints itself. But form 4 an assertion. We're going to use the post method because this is for creating a new assertion, and we're going to pass in the URL for the specific assertion path, passing in the assertion we're working with. Actually, that might be buggy, but no, that works in my test, so it must be okay. So here's the update assertions form, virtually identical, except we're using the put method. So here we're really getting semantic, saying this is the resource I'm working with. That's where the URL comes from. I'm working with this assertion, and I'm trying to do this action to this assertion. So it's very much moving to what I like to think of as object orientation for the web. We're saying I want to send this message to this resource, to this object. And what that means for us later is that how many have heard of Active Resource? It's a project that Core is working on that hasn't been put out yet. Okay, Active Resource is like Active Record for the web. Because we follow these conventions and are using the Http verbs properly, you can say, I want to grab all of the users from this web page. And it does a get to the user's resource and grabs it all and treats it just like an active record. So you've got a nice object that you can create associations with. You've got a nice record that you can delete or destroy, and it'll pass the verbs back as needed. So that was sort of a lightning tour of REST and Rails. Chris is going to follow up with the web service stuff. Are there questions? I see some confused faces. Please, ask questions. Alex. Mm-hmm. When the HTML is generated, this is a little hacky, and some people have taken issue to it, but what Rails does is put in a special hidden field, underscore method, that tells it what it's working with if you're dealing with it coming from HTML. So it sort of injects it that way. But if you're actually sending the proper verbs, Rails will actually understand the proper verbs. So when we need the workaround for the browsers because the browsers don't support the extra verbs. But if you can, using something like curl or a web services framework or something else, then it'll work properly. Other questions? Alex, go ahead. Well, there are a few others, Head among them, but really when Rails is dealing with resources, it mostly just worries about the CRUD actions, create, read, update, delete. The other stuff isn't entirely useful for what we're working with. And if we find a use for it, I doubt people would keep it out. But at the moment, this is all we need. So there's no reason to go any further. Other questions? Okay. Chris, you ready to go? Cool. So 5-minute break. Chris Abad is going to talk about RESTful web search.
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.